What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 224. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. Today, talking about Russia, COVID, coups in Africa, so a lot of interesting stuff that I'm sure my audience is absolutely going to love. Share the show, Libertarian Institute at the blog, antiwar.com, and then video version on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. It's up everywhere. You can listen to audio podcasts. The most basic thing you could do to help the show is just to recommend it, share it, put it out there to more people. If you want to do a little bit more, you could donate to the show. We have take recurring donations at Patreon, Subscribestar. We also got crypto information, all that in the show notes page, as well as the information for the show's sponsor, Paloma Verde, palomaverdecbd.com. Promo code PEACE. They'll save you 25% off when you spend $75 or more, and it gets the show a kit bag, so it's a great way to get yourself some great CBD products to improve your life and to help out a show that you really love. They have a great lineup of products at Paloma Verde. I personally like the topicals. The soft gels are also excellent and really good for working an extended period of time, and you get some pretty quick relief with that as well. So palomaverdecbd.com, promo code PEACE. All right, let's get into the show. All right, first up on today's show is Russia news, and got a lot to get through. And want to start with this contrast that we've been pointing to on this show since November, and that is the difference between the United States and Ukraine and how concerned each government is about a Russian invasion. Initially, as you know, we pointed out on this show, which seemed very odd, the U.S. was far more concerned about a Russian invasion, and Ukraine initially dismissed the possibility, saying, we're really not that concerned about it. But in the months since, it seems that Ukraine had bought into the invasion narrative, and I'm sure, you know, there's political reasons why the president of Ukraine, Zelenksyy, would want, war fever to be brought up. Maybe, that increases nationalism and his support and all of that, rally around the flag effect. Also, weapons and military aid are pouring into Ukraine, so I'm sure that, looks kind of good and everything too. And he probably likes weapons flying into his country for free, from the US, Canada, UK. I believe now Poland is even sending weapons. Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania send javelins and stingers. So tons of weapons moving into Ukraine. And, you could see why the buildup in this rhetoric probably was viewed by the Ukrainian government as somewhat of a positive. You also had the U.S. government making and continuing to make statements like, we're going to defend Ukraine's territorial sovereignty and we support Ukraine's sovereignty and all of this. However, in the past 2 to 3 weeks, Ukraine seems to have really gotten interested in once again trying to moderate the threats of a potential Russian invasion and not just going all for this U.S. rhetoric that, an invasion is definitely going to happen. We really need to be concerned about it. And so Dave DeCamp writes this on January 25th, White House, Ukraine at odds over threat of Russian invasion. He says, with all eyes on Ukraine and Russia, officials in Washington and Kiev don't seem to be on the same page. Ukrainian officials are urging calm and say a Russian incursion isn't imminent, but over in Washington, the scaremongering continues. When faced with Ukraine's assessment of the situation, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki insisted that Russia could invade at any moment. Asked if the U.S. believes the threat is imminent, Psaki replied, correct. Later in the day, Biden appeared to admit that he doesn't actually know if Russia will invade. This is all Putin. I don't think even his people know for certain what he's going to do. In Kiev, Ukrainian defense minister told parliament, as of today, there is no grounds to believe Russia will immediately invade immediately. The Associated Press reported, don't worry, sleep well, no need to have your bags packed. And this came after, as we reported on the show last week, the U.S. started allowing its embassy staff to leave the country, told the families of its embassy staff to leave the country, and this week issued a pretty stern warning, probably Thursday or Friday of last week, issued a pretty stern warning saying that Americans needed to leave the country. So then we had a call between Biden and Zelensky, and this occurred on January 27th. And, initially I read this through the tweet, and the POTUS Twitter account just says, I spoke with Ukrainian President Zelenksyy to discuss our coordinated diplomatic efforts and reaffirm our support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We will respond decisively along with our allies and partners if Russia further invades Ukraine. And so in a way this sounds like a pretty strong statement because you understand that he's talking to the Ukrainian president. And so if he's telling the Ukrainian president we're going to make a strong statement and we support Ukraine's territorial integrity, and we're also saying that Russia is going to invade, it kind of sounds like we're saying that we're going to prevent a Russian invasion potentially with our own troops and defend Ukraine. Now, that very clearly is not the Biden policy when you get more detailed and flesh out what they're actually going to do. But whenever you see that tweet, that's kind of the initial thought of what happened on that phone call. Is you just had the U.S. supporting the rhetoric, but then you have reports from the Ukrainian side that it did not go well. This from Axios: Zelensky questions U.S. warnings of imminent invasion in Biden call. And this was reported from CNN initially, at least, saying that it was the call did not go well, and then I've seen other outlets kind of downplayed a little bit more. But Zelensky raised the White House warnings of an imminent threat. Biden pointed to the possibility that Russia will invade once the ground freezes, and said that's why the U.S. is sending so much weaponry. And so there is this phrase that keeps getting used, when the ground freezes, and it does sound kind of like a CIA or intelligence community kind of thing in the U.S. that isn't true, like a chemical weapons kind of slogan thingy. Oh, Russia's going to invade when the ground freezes, and that is it's sometime in the future. We don't know exactly when, but it's gonna happen, and then it may never happen. They'll be like, the ground didn't get soft enough or something like that. They'll make something up or have another excuse, but I'm not quite sure that that's really what Russia is waiting for, if they really do plan to invade, which I'm not 100% sure of. You know what I mean? I'm pretty skeptical of that as well. So very interesting that we're getting this out of the Ukrainian side, that they're very unhappy with the U.S. and this rhetoric actually escalated at a press conference. Zelensky slammed the West for creating a panic after the Biden call. He said there are signals even from respected leaders of states. They are just saying that tomorrow there will be war. This is panic. How much does it cost our state? And part of what Zelensky is talking about when he says how much does it cost is that the Ukrainian economy has really suffered since all of this rhetoric has built up and the risk of war has built up. Of course, if you're thinking about opening a new plant or something in Ukraine, making an investment in Ukraine, the fact that Russia may invade that country, or if you're listening to the Western media reports Russia will invade that country, then I think you're unlikely to go through with that investment. So it's pretty, I guess, maybe not understandable that Zelensky is concerned and that's hurting business. At the same time, I feel like it's a little bit of his own government's fault for Biden along with this all the way. And again, they were getting paid off in all the free weapons, but it did come at a cost, and this is that cost. So we also have the Ukrainian foreign minister saying that there are not enough Russian troops to actually invade Ukraine. Now, we did have an announcement from the U.S. that there are more troops moving into the region. That was today. Pentagon spokesperson John Kirby said that Russia continues to add more troops around Ukraine. It wasn't exactly clear to me if he was talking about the increase of troops that we know about going on in Belarus for the planned war games that'll go on between about February 10th and 20th. Or if he's talking about different troops potentially moving back to the Ukrainian border. It's still unclear to me exactly how many troops are there. They've been using this around 10,000, 100,000 number for well over a month. And that's included times where the U.S. or Russia, excuse me, removed 10,000 troops, and there wasn't like an acknowledgement or any change in that 100,000 number for that. And then when Russia's added more troops, they're still saying about 100,000. Although I have seen some outlets actually go and start to talk about 125,000 using around that number. So all this very important and interesting. Now a couple more points on like the diplomacy end. We have Russia saying that there's not going to be a war if it's up to Russia. Now this could be taken in a couple ways where Russia is really saying that, hey, we're committed to in any way avoiding a war, and unless somebody like invades the Donbass or attacks Crimea, there's not going to be a war. Or Russia could be saying that we would really like to avoid a war, but if they admit NATO, Ukraine into NATO, then war is going to happen. There's a lot of questions about what exactly this statement means, but I do think in general it's probably correct that Russia will look in any way to avoid a potential conflict in Ukraine. So my main reason, I guess, for thinking that Russia is still really dedicated to avoiding war, of course, is I think the Russians probably understand all the negatives that come with war, the cost, and how it's not going to be a paradise on the other end of it. There's still going to be a lot of spending to rebuild whatever was lost, also rebuild the crumbling Ukrainian infrastructure that they would have to build, like in Crimea. Even with that being, like a bloodless takeover, it was still a multi-billion-dollar like Russian project for infrastructure in Crimea and all that. And I'm guessing that they would see a similar situation in a lot of this other area. I also know, there's a lot of pensioners in that area, so annexing would, of course, be a big cost there too. Although I did read this week that Russia was actually going to start to at least give Russian passport holders in the separatist Donbass region the ability to access Russian pension. I'm not quite sure what that is compared to Ukrainian pension. My instinct would be it's a better deal, but I'm not exactly sure, and that could drive more people to take the Russian passports, which they are offering in the Donbass region now. Russia's commitment to talks, though, we have the U.S. handing over their written response to Russia's security demands, and we got, from the U.S. and the Secretary of State saying that basically we didn't offer anything. On the last episode of the show, Connor Freeman broke down that there may have been some real Biden influence in there, and then there was some real back and forth onto what was actually going to go into that letter. And so there could have maybe been some positives in there, but given the U.S. and the Russian reaction, there weren't many. However, yesterday, the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, said that they're waiting on a response from European countries on what they feel like their European security obligations from Western nations are, and then they're going to make another proposal on the Ukraine crisis. And so reading this, it seems like Russia is still really interested in a detailed and nuanced round of negotiations with the West, and they have not kind of committed themselves to the war path. I'm not sure if there's any kind of timeline on it from the Russian end, like maybe once we're into later February, they're going to be less interested in pursuing more rounds of talks and more confrontation. But I don't know about that. It seems at this point Russia is still pretty committed to the diplomacy path. And of course, the analysis from experts like Ray McGovern and Gilbert Doctorow, and as I've been talking about on the show, how even among, I would say, like the more anti-war, non-interventionist, realist type analysts, they are some of the most optimistic, not only on the potential for diplomacy here, but I guess how much Russia is really looking to get from the U.S. and how possible it is that something could be agreed to. And so a point Doctorow made on his recent interview on the Scott Horton show, which I think was really important, was I guess how much is Russia interested in the primary issues versus the secondary issues. And the primary issues, I guess, would be Ukrainian NATO membership and things like that, and secondary be where missiles are placed and what kind of missile deals there are. And I think it's a very interesting perspective, and I really hope that he's right, that they're more concerned about the secondary issues than the primary one, because the U.S. continues to say that they're unwilling to talk at all with Russia about closing NATO expansion, at least westward NATO expansion and things like that, or eastward NATO expansion. What else was I going to say on this point? Maybe, being willing to agree to a more tentative or unofficial agreement on something like that, where you do have the U.S. statements that Ukraine isn't going to join NATO for 10 years. You do have the knowledge that I'm pretty sure that France and Germany aren't going to vote to admit Ukraine into NATO, and so the membership, at least for the foreseeable future, is pretty unlikely. So a verbal agreement on that, plus an actual in-written agreement on some kind of missiles, on troop deployments, on war games in Eastern Europe or something. Maybe that is something that really is the goal of Russia. Now, I guess, there is the perspective too of, does Russia really want to annex more of Ukraine, and what benefit would they have of doing that? And I've, talked about on the show how, I think that there's a certain advantage to Russia to keeping the situation and the status quo as is. And so maybe Russia was just worried about the U.S. shifting too far away from the status quo, and all of this is really about trying to lock in the current situation, and maybe, just get a little bit more on keeping weapons out of Ukraine, versus actually trying to get a guarantee on Ukrainian NATO membership, which is more what I've been saying on the show. So I want to point out that, I might be shifting my position a little bit, but this is all a lot of information. I'm just trying to give you, what I'm hearing and everything, and breaking it down in the different perspectives on this. So we do also have Russia, and I think this does add to Doctorow's argument. Dave DeCamp writes this up January 27th at antiwar.com. Russian officials warn a new missile crisis is unavoidable without arms control. A Russian arms control official said Thursday a new missile crisis is unavoidable without the U.S. and Russia reaching new agreements on arms control. Specifically, Russia is seeking a moratorium on the development of short and medium-range missiles in Europe that were previously banned under the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty, which the U.S. withdrew from in 2019. The proposed INF ban was part of the security proposals Russia presented to the U.S. last month. The U.S. responded on Wednesday, and while Washington rejected Moscow's demands to halt NATO expansion, both sides said there was rooms for dialogue on arms control. We'll continue to insist it is a priority to reach our principal understanding that the problems in this area must be urgently addressed. Otherwise, new missile crises are unavoidable. So very important what we're getting from Russia on this issue. And while they have drawn a red line on Ukrainian NATO membership, and again, as much as I do think that it's possible that they really are very interested and maybe just interested in this a missile agreement, an INF ban type agreement, that they are very concerned about the potential of NATO membership. So let's see, what else do we have here on this issue? We have the Nord Stream 2 will not be moved forward if Russia invades Ukraine, according to the State Department, this from Reuters. And I found this, point that the State Department is trying to make here very interesting, because I haven't heard directly from Germany, and certainly not from like the German chancellor or anything like that, any kind of incursion, annexation, invasion of NATO, or of Germany, or of Ukraine, by Russia, would result in sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, shutting down the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, or anything like that. In fact, Germany has, I think, been very careful not to say that. And so I wonder if the U.S. is actually overstepping on its what its European ally thinks here. Also talking about Europe, we had this article from Moo of Alabama that I think is really important. British government laundered fake U.S. intelligence on Ukraine, and he's talking about the story we got a couple weeks ago now, or maybe a week ago. Yeah, 1 week ago, from the UK, saying that Russia was planning to overthrow the Ukrainian government and install a new government, and they did that without providing any evidence. And then now we have from the Washington Post, the intelligence underlying that revelation, which also linked some former Ukrainian politicians to Russian intelligence officers involved in planning an attack on Ukraine, was collected and declassified by the United States, according to multiple people familiar with the matter. The Biden administration asked the British government, which vetted the intelligence and was confident in its accuracy, to publicly expose the Russian plotting, the people said. And so this is, laundering intelligence and information rather than the U.S. just not coming forward and saying that we have this, we give it to our British allies to do that. And why? Because it looks like it has a lot more legitimacy that way. If you're an American and you hear that the British intelligence believe it too, well, if you're just skeptical of the CIA or something, when you hear that the, MI5 or MI6 or whoever the hell is signing off on it, you think, well, this must be good, and there might not be a problem with it, when actually, there's still a problem with it, and it's just laundered intelligence. And we haven't seen any of the evidence that, these governments claim that they have. The Pentagon says that, I already hit this one. This was Russia adding more troops and unsure of where those are going. Russia is also planning on carrying out more war games, naval war games, and initially they were planning on carrying out these war games off the coast of Ireland, but Ireland's foreign minister asked Russia not to carry out the drills inside the country's exclusive economic zone, and Russia did respond positively to that and apparently will not be carrying out the war games in that area as requested by the Irish. And then this from Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. U.S. naval presence in Black Sea more than doubled in 2021 as compared to 2020. And then this is looking at the number of days that there were U.S. warships in the Black Sea, and that was 182 collected days in 2021 versus 82 in 2020. Now, the number was higher back in 2014 after the U.S. invasion or U.S. coup in Ukraine, and then Russia annexing the Crimean Peninsula and the separatist civil war breaking out in the Donbass region. But here we have it ramped back up after dropping to a low of 58 days in the middle years between 2014 and 2020. So heightened tensions in the Black Sea because of U.S. actions. This story from William Arkin at Newsweek: as U.S.-Russia tensions rise, U.S. stress tests new nuclear war plan. And they're looking at the new U.S. Nuclear war plan that they have, the nuclear posture review and everything like that. And Strategic Command is going to carry out the Global Lightning Games. Apparently this one is more oriented towards China, although we don't have a lot of facts on what actually happens, in these games. They don't say that this is how we're looking at this. But, one of the very interesting things that this, set of war games does is it looks at retaliation in nuclear war, right? So it's not just, if nuclear war breaks out with China, we're going to hit these 50 sites, these cities, and then these missile silos, these naval bases, these airfields, things like that. They're talking about, okay, so, China hits us, they take out half our ground-based missiles, and so now after that, we're going to launch and hit these sites, and, the back and forth and how that goes, and just how dark it is to be carrying out these kind of war games. When you're talking about back and forth, volleys of nuclear weapons against each other, and just what that would do to humanity, and how many of us are going to die in such a situation is absolutely disgusting. Next story is from BuzzFeed News. NATO won't put troops in Ukraine, but Western foreigners are volunteering to join the fight against Russia. And very interesting here, they say about 300 people total, I believe, and 40 from the US, 12 from the UK, others from the European Union are traveling to Ukraine and joining up with the Ukrainian military. Now, they say that, some people are doing this because they want money, or just looking for adventure, war stories, things like that. But then there are also extremists who have seen opportunities to link up with far-right paramilitary groups in the Ukraine, and they really don't elaborate on that point, but I really think it's an important point. If there are Westerners, people from the US traveling to Ukraine to join up and fight with extremists, then this is essentially what happened in Syria with the rise of ISIS and all the problems that came from that, and something we should really be concerned about. It's absolutely shocking to me here too that BuzzFeed writes an article where they could go off on right-wing white nationalist extremist and choose to only mention it one time in that article. Unsure why, but they are very hawkish on Russia, so that's probably the reason. So, as mentioned in that article, we had an announcement from NATO leader Jens Stoltenberg that NATO would not send any combat troops into Ukraine. Now, he did say combat troops, so that could mean that, they're sending trainers and things like that into Ukraine. I think there's Canadian and British forces there. Of course, the CIA paramilitaries are apparently fighting, at somewhere in Ukraine and training somewhere in Ukraine as well. But there's definitely activity by Western forces in that country, although Stoltenberg is saying that there's going to be no more combat forces. So continuing with that, I think general policy and idea that the U.S. isn't serious about fighting a war on behalf of the Ukrainian government against Russia. Biden says he'll send troops to Eastern Europe in the near term. Not exactly sure where these are going. He did say it would be not a lot of troops. No idea what this means. Very vague. Maybe just trying to appease the Hots a little bit, but not really going to make a difference in any way if there's a conflict with Russia. We now have some more things going on in the Senate. U.S. senators are writing a bill with substantial sanctions against Ukraine. This is a bipartisan group of 10 senators, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, all high-ranking members, working to put, I think one of them called it the mother of all sanctions against Russia and things like that. Some of these bills, by the way, when Congress passes these sanctions, it actually requires Congress to pass a bill to remove the sanctions. And so it could in that way kind of tie the president's hands on negotiations. And apparently there are still some issues, and it's not exactly guaranteed that this bill will come out or that it will have everybody's support, because there's an argument over sanctioning the Nord Stream 2 pipeline or not. My assumption would be the Republicans want to sanction it and the Democrats don't. Last story on Russia, and this is the little bit of good news is that you're getting in the U.S., and this from Reuters. U.S. companies push Biden Congress for caution on Russia sanctions. And there's several companies, mainly from the oil lobby, that are saying that, hey, if you put these stringent sanctions on Russia, it's going to prevent us from fulfilling our contracts and, doing all the things that we do to make money. So you can't put these sanctions on Russia, or at least you have to be careful with them if you do. I don't know how far this is going to get. If it came to China or something like that, my guess is the business interests would outweigh the military industrial complex's lobbying abilities. When it comes to Russia, I don't think that's really the case. So, but at the same time, the fact that some people are interested in not increasing the warfare is important, and it could help to move the margins just a little bit, and sometimes that's really all you need. All right, let's talk about Africa. Sudan first, where protests are ongoing against the government there. On October 25th, I think general, but high-ranking military officer named Abdel Fattah al-Burhan took over that country and deposed the Prime Minister Hamdok. Protests followed, and after about a month, actually, Hamdok was, at least in name, returned to power, although earlier this month or late in December, he actually resigned again. I think basically because his hands were tied and he wasn't getting anywhere. So the protests have been ongoing since October. Western countries have cut aid and threatened sanctions, although I don't think sanctions have really been enforced heavily on Ukraine or on Sudan up until this point. So at least that's some good news. I believe some of the protest organizations have asked international governments not to give the Sudanese government any aid because it's just being stolen and used against them. Since October, at least 79 people have died, and this number has increased by about 20 as far as I could tell throughout the month of January. Protests have been going on several times a week throughout the country. It's a fairly large country, remember, and so it's not that all these people are dying in the same city in the same place or something. Typically it seems around one or two a day. I haven't read there being, I think, more than 7 protesters killed in a single day in the month of January, and so I think the total has probably increased by about 20 to 25 demonstrators killed throughout this month. Now, it doesn't seem to be, I guess, having real effect, at least as an outside observer, somebody in the West through Western media can pick up here on the government's ability to rule or anything like that. I think they have a lot of support, maybe not from the Western governments, but more from the Gulf Arab states and things like that. So at this point, the protests are ongoing and continue to be deadly, continue to kill protesters, and at the same time, there doesn't seem to be any real urgent need for resolution or any sign that this is coming to an end anytime soon. Now on to Burkina Faso, where last week when I talked about Burkina Faso on the show, I mentioned that the soldiers were claiming they were moving in on the presidential palace and gunfire could be heard in the country, but I wasn't sure if this was maybe just an elevated sense of security or if there was really a coup going on. And it turns out there was really a coup going on. The president of the country, Roch Marc Christian Kabore, has been deposed and apparently elected. From my understanding, there's no indication he was killed or anything, just arrested by the military. And the new leader is Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry San Dogo Dambia, and he was apparently the commander of one of the country's 3 military regions. But more important than that, he was heavily trained by the United States. Nick Turse has a great article at The Intercept. Another U.S. trained soldier stages a coup in West Africa, and he lays out that the lieutenant colonel who took over the country participated in 2010 and 2012 in the annual Special Operations Training Program known as the Flintlock Exercise in 2013. He was accepted into the Africa Counterinsurgency Operations Training and Assistance course in 2013 and 2014. He attended the U.S.-sponsored Military Intelligence Basic Officer course Africa in 2018 and 19. He participated in the engagement with U.S. Defense Department civil military support elements in Burkina Faso. And so essentially nearly every year over the past 5 years, this guy has engaged in some kind of training with the United States. Apparently he speaks English and is now in control of the country after deposing the president, who was apparently elected twice in 2015 and 2020. I guess I use the word apparently there just to qualify that I don't know how legitimate his elections were, but he did win elections, quote unquote. Last thing I'll just mention, I've talked about this in the past on the show, that there was growing instability in Burkina Faso, not just generally on the security side where there's, jihadists running around and things like that, but also, protests against the government, just people generally being upset and feeling like the government wasn't doing what it needed to do. And so it didn't necessarily come as a surprise to me that there was a coup here. Or that the coup leader had U.S. backing, because so many times it happens. I think Terse has a whole list in that article, but he highlights the current coup leader of Mali was U.S. trained. In Guinea, it was a U.S. trained I think colonel again there that overthrew the government. And so I don't know why these governments allow their military to train with the U.S., because it seems like it would turn them into huge liabilities, as again in Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, and all these other countries. But continues to happen. Coups continue to be the result. Moving on to Mali, where there was an American soldier injured in an attack on the French military base in Gao. A French soldier was killed in the attack, and 9 other soldiers, it didn't give the nationality of those soldiers, were injured. These soldiers were a part of Operation Barkhane, and that's France's forever war in the Sahel region. If you want more background on that, check out the episode of the show. I think it's from June or July of 2021 with Major Danny Sherjan, who breaks down Mali's role in, France's colonial and, kind of their lasting colonial influence in Africa and things like that, and then the U.S. role there. And on the last show that I talked about Mali last week, I broke down how Biden had initially wanted to draw down American involvement in this war, but instead has ramped it up because France was so upset about being cut out of a submarine deal over the AUKUS, that's the Australian, UK, US agreement, where the US is now going to sell nuclear powered submarines to Australia, and in an effort to appease the French over being upset about losing out on selling the Australians diesel powered submarines. The US decided that they were going to increase their support for France's war in the Sahel, which had lost popular support in France. And so Macron was drawing down what France was doing in Mali. And as France and stuff withdrew and drew down in Mali, and a military coup happened. It created a situation where now the ruling military of Mali has invited Russians in to support their fight against the jihadists, which are largely a spillover from Obama's war in Libya, right? And it's just created all these problems. I'm not quite sure what authority France and the US claim they're in Mali under. I know there's this, I think G5, it's a UN group of West African states, I believe Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and 2 other countries, I'm not sure which 2, are in like a coalition, and I think that has some UN backing. But at the same time, the ruling government of Mali recently told the Dutch to get their soldiers out of Mali, and the Danish troops did end up leaving. So this was very interesting that the Malian ruling government here, even though it is just a military government, was able to demand that Denmark pull out its troops, and then they end up doing so, right? This is I guess unexpected. I would think that if a Western government put their troops in Africa and the African country told them to leave, and there were US and French troops there, that would be enough to keep those troops in Mali. But that's not actually what happened here. And in fact, initially the French told the Denmark that they should keep their soldiers there, and that there was a request from the previous government that existed before the military took over that told them that they could stay, and that wasn't good enough, and so now Denmark is withdrawing its soldiers. All right, now we're going to move on to some COVID news and got a bunch of different things here to talk about. The first is that the Department of Labor is withdrawing its Osha mandate for any employers that had over 100 employees. They were going to have to mandate the vaccine or require their employees to wear a mask and test every week. It was struck down by the Supreme Court, and after the Supreme Court struck it down, the OSHA dropped it. So good news there. The Supreme Court will not take up a case on mask mandates for air travelers, and so that will remain in place. A federal judge in Texas blocked Biden's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for federal employees. This had an important effect on the Pentagon, and there it suspended its vaccine mandate against civilian employees. However, it's continuing to dismiss soldiers for not having the COVID vaccine. The latest round was, I think, 23 sailors, and that brings us up to 500 total members of the armed forces who have been dismissed for refusing the COVID-19 vaccination. Also want to mention that, in spite of the other things going on, with the federal judges, with the OSHA mandate, Biden still wants U.S. federal agencies to mandate COVID-19 testing, I believe weekly, for unvaccinated employees by February 15th. So that'll be coming up here in just a couple of weeks. For the first time, the Department of Defense has granted a religious exemption. It's going to go to a couple of Marines, I think, maybe two, just two, I think, but it is going to give the first religious exemption, so somebody will not have to take the COVID vaccine. In total, 18,500 troops have requested such exemptions. The Air Force received the highest number with over 10,000, followed by the Marines with 3,300, the Navy with 2,800, and the Army with 1,700. And so far, again, other than Marines, no branch has approved this. I do believe that there was a court ruling with some Navy SEALs that allowed them to seek an exemption before being dismissed. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with this decision to start handing out the religious exemptions or how many the DoD plans to hand out in total. Biden announced that he's deploying 1,000 military personnel to medical facilities to help with the COVID cases, or I guess, that's probably a little bit misleading. They're just helping with hospitalizations in the United States. And, of course, that is in part because of COVID, but it's probably in part because of the staffing shortages of some hospitals that they're facing as well. Wisconsin is deploying their National Guard to long-term nursing care facilities. I think it's approximately 50 National Guardsmen are going to deploy. Rhode Island is deploying their National Guard to a psychiatric hospital, and apparently they're moving some people around to put maybe less acute patients or less severe patients into the facilities with the National Guard. But, nonetheless, these are pretty, intense situations to put yourself in, either being in a nursing home or a psychiatric hospital. And it's concerning to me that, they're talking about deploying the National Guard to these positions. And it makes me worry about potential increased chances for abuse and neglect and things like that, especially for people who really aren't trained and really don't want to deal with these kind of situations, which again could be extremely difficult. Oregon deploys 700 more National Guardsmen troops to reduce extreme pressure on hospitals, and the New Mexico National Guard is asking its members and soldiers to teach, as apparently they're running out of teachers in New Mexico. And there's a lot of levels that this one's concerning, from the fact that qualification ? And then also you have the kind of like with having the ROTC soldiers and heads there teach in classrooms and things like that. How much more indoctrination are you going to have? Biden has announced that he will double the number of tests that he's going to buy and give away for free to 1 billion. I believe as of this point, any household could get 4 tests, which I don't know why you have every household could get 1 test and you're ordering 1 billion. Also, there's families of 5 and things like that. Although I'm not sure how strict they're being. I didn't try to order one of these things or anything like that. You see a lot of videos that people are posting using these rapid at-home tests, and soda and different things like that are resulting in positives. And so I'm not sure how accurate these things are or anything like that, but the US government is going to spend a lot of money on them. And then we also have Biden announcing that he's going to make high quality N95 masks available, and the US had a stockpile of I think 750 million of them. And so I'm not sure why we're stockpiling quite so many and how many the administration is planning on giving away, but they say they're going to do that. They're also requiring insurers to cover 8 at-home tests per month. I'm not sure, again, why take the 2 routes of offering 1 billion tests for free and asking the insurers to cover them. You'd think that if the insurers are covering them, you could probably buy far less than 1 billion at-home rapid tests. And of course, when you're buying that many too, and the U.S. government is doing it, you do have to worry about like sucking off the market and just basically not having enough tests to go around to other countries and things like that. Now, trying to figure out where these tests are coming from is kind of confusing. The Pentagon has announced that they are buying a good number of the tests, but they haven't exactly said like how much they're paying per test. The first story I have here from Reuters: Pentagon awards 52 million contract for COVID-19 test, and they are going to again offer $52 million to Goldbelt Securities LLC for the purchase of COVID-19 antigen tests, but doesn't say how many tests they're going to deliver to the Pentagon. There's a second contract where they have announced they're buying 13.3 million tests from Revival Health, but did not say how much they're paying Revival Health for those tests. And then we have another announcement for the Pentagon that they have awarded contracts for a total of 380 million over-the-counter COVID tests to Abbott Rapid DX North America LLC, iHeart Lab Inc., Roche Diagnostics Corporation, and no details exactly on who's getting what slice of the pie and how much the Pentagon is paying for each one of these tests, or how the decisions are being made on like accuracy and things like that, what tests they're buying. Again, very curious to me that all these tests are being purchased through the Pentagon, and maybe that's just the easiest kind of slush fund way for the Biden administration to come up with the cash, kind of like with Trump's wall situation. That's just the money pit he's going towards. Or it could be maybe that Congress allocated it for whatever reason in a DOD budget like the NDAA. The U.S. also announced that they are purchasing 600 doses of GSK Vir's COVID-19 therapy. The Biden administration is trying to double the number of tests it could do in schools to 10 million. I'm not sure over what time span the U.S. is looking at carrying out those 10 million tests. One very disturbing thing that I've come across, and this was in relation to the Virginia governor's race and things like that, something people weren't talking about, but parents seemed very unhappy with, was how they were doing the COVID testing in school, and they were batch testing where, like, you got a kindergarten class where every kid sticks the thing up their nose, and then they all put it in one cup, and then they send that, cup off as a batch and test it. And so I guess, like, you had some parents whose kids were testing positive multiple times, and that'd be a very stressful situation for those poor kids. And I hope we're not increasing that kind of testing, because that seems like it's just generating all kinds of crazy numbers and results and trauma for kids that don't need it. Massachusetts announced that it was going to change the way it reported on its COVID-19 hospitalizations between primary and incidental cases. Here we are 2 years into it. We're finally we could talk about of versus with COVID. And that's interesting because they find that about in the first week of counting this way, about 50% of Massachusetts hospitalizations weren't admitted for COVID, that these are incidental cases of COVID-19. And so they came in for another reason. I'm not quite sure though if that counts. Maybe people, like, let's say you're an old man, you break your hip, you go to the hospital, and then you catch COVID and you die in the hospital of COVID. That's not that I'm not sure if that counts as like an incidental infection or a primary one. But there's a lot to these numbers, and hopefully the more that people start to break this stuff down, the better idea you could actually have of how many people are actually dying because of COVID. There are going to be some hospitals in California, Arizona, and Rhode Island that allow hospital staff who have tested positive with COVID-19 but have mild symptoms or none at all, and they're going to allow them to stay on the job. This seems kind of baffling to me. I don't exactly understand why you would allow that to happen. You would think that this is maybe one of the definite places that if somebody is even maybe sick, you would tell them to stay home rather than come in. Now, I know there's staffing shortages and everything like that, but the U.S. really shot themselves in the foot by mandating the vaccine and costing itself so many medical staff and everything like that. It put themselves in that situation, but I think the likely solution would be just to do everything you can to get more medical personnel into the door, and then this will resolve the problem so you could have nurses call out sick and not come in and infect a whole bunch of people with COVID. The number of New York State hospitals that cancel elective surgeries has grown to 40. This was in the beginning of January. I hadn't seen an updated number, so my guess is that's probably about at the peak. But, it's serious that these kind of things are happening. Moderna announced that it has 18.5 billion in vaccine orders for 2022, and they had 17.5 billion in 2021. So just understand that a lot of money is being made here. I believe I mentioned this on the show, but not as a part of COVID, or maybe I mentioned it on other people's shows, but very important here. A story from Yahoo News. With more girls pregnant, Zimbabwe pushes a return to school, and talks about in this article how the way the incentives have switched under COVID for very young girls in places like Zimbabwe has made it so it's now, a way forward in life is to get yourself pregnant from an older man at a very young age, subjecting yourself to statutory rape in order to get knocked up, and then to have that man marry you and essentially have a place in life because their schools were closed down for 2 years. And, these are the kind of things that 13-year-olds do when their schools are closed down for 2 years and they're made to think that they don't have a future. And so, this is just one of the consequences of increased poverty. Talked about it on the show very beginning of COVID. They're talking about lockdowns, and I said, maybe it's not a bad idea to stay home for a little bit, but understand if you're really going to hurt the global supply chain, you're really going to hurt the people and the poorest of the poor in the world. And when you hurt the poorest of the poor in the world, that means that 13-year-old girls get themselves pregnant by creepy old men and hope that they'll marry them and likely put themselves with a child that is going to be very difficult for them to take care of as a 13-year-old girl. COVAX, that's the International and Global UN Vaccine Distribution Program, claims it is now given out 1 billion vaccines, although there's been a report that nations have rejected 100 million COVID-19 vaccines because they were about to expire. And so I kind of suspect that maybe COVAX is inflating its numbers, especially because some of these vaccines get offered to multiple countries. You don't want to, that only expires in 2 weeks. And so just, they make it sound like they're doing a great service to the developing world, but I really don't think it's the case. The African CDC reported that 2 million doses of the COVID vaccine have expired, and the shelf life for it is often, at just a couple months when it gets to these African countries, and that they just don't have the time to deploy all these vaccines, and so a lot of them get wasted. I guess that's part of the problem with doing things the way the West, and particularly the U.S., has chosen to do them. Right, that we buy up all the vaccines and we distribute them to whoever we want. They get those vaccines when we give them to them, not when they're fresh off the line and Pfizer sending them out to everyone. So it's probably really hurt African countries to do it this way. Now the U.S. has announced ton of millions and millions of vaccines to go countries around the world. They say that they're giving 278,000 to Benin, 150,000 to Chad, about 400,000 to Niger, over 3 million to Nigeria, and 222,000 to Zambia. Also have 800,000 to the Ivory Coast, over 100,000 to Liberia, another 2.5 million to Nigeria, about 1 million to Rwanda, 400,000 to Madagascar, and then 300,000 to Guinea, another 300,000 to Nigeria, another 1 million to Rwanda, and 1.6 million to Tanzania. Almost all these vaccine doses are Pfizer, or at least specified by the U.S. as Pfizer. Occasionally they aren't, and this particular batch of 3 million actually wasn't. Then we have an announcement of 3 million and then 1.8 million, so for a total of about 5 million COVID Pfizer vaccines to Egypt, and donations of 2 million vaccines to Kenya and Morocco. I think the bulk of them are going to Kenya, and Morocco is getting it's the other way around. Morocco is getting 1.6 million and Kenya is getting 500,000. Now, in the past on the show, I have talked about how Kenya is one of the countries that has deployed lobbyists in the United States to get more vaccines. The U.S. announced 600,000 vaccines are going to Ukraine, well over 5 million in two separate shipments to the Philippines, 5.5 million about total, and then 7 million doses to Bangladesh, and we've donated over $28 million to Bangladesh so far. Last up, about 40,000 Pfizer COVID vaccines to Haiti. Now, interesting on Haiti, of course, and I haven't followed this very closely, but initially the Haitian government was very tentative, and that would have been under the now assassinated President Morsi, about taking these vaccines from Western countries. But now under Ariel Henry, they're at least accepting some. All right, everybody, that's where I'm wrapping up for today. Hope you're all enjoying the show. Share it. Conflicts of Interest is on the Libertarian Institute, antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, Odysee, everywhere you could listen to podcasts. Social media accounts at Facebook and Twitter, and then you could donate. Patreon, Subscribestar, crypto information is in the show notes page, and do your CBD shopping at Paloma Verde, PalomaVerdeCBD.com. Use the promo code PEACE to help yourself out, get a discount, and to help the show. Thanks.